to our now regular Friday exploration of different essays by Dr. Leonard Peikoff. Today we're talking about his 1981 essay, Maybe You're Wrong, published in the Objectivist Forum in April of 1981, Volume 2, Number 2. It's a classic essay, now 40 years old. And Dr. Peikoff begins with a classic question that every philosophy undergraduate and probably people who aren't even students of philosophy have faced at some point. Maybe you're just dreaming. Maybe all this that you're experiencing, you're not experiencing a podcast about epistemology with James Valliant, about Leonard Peikoff. Maybe you're just in bed dreaming. Or maybe you're a psychotic having a hallucination. And maybe you're in some insane asylum someplace. Maybe it is that instead of some benevolent God out there, there's an evil demon controlling everything that you see and hear and feel. Someone chuckling, as Peikoff says, with delight that he's taken you in so thoroughly. Well, that kind of question seems like an odd way to begin an essay, he says, and surely it is. But that is, of course, the way modern philosophy begins. The great philosopher and mathematician René Descartes from the 17th century commenced the whole operation, if you will. He's considered the father of modern philosophy. The entire process of thinking that it characterizes Western philosophy with just that procedure. He wanted to begin to doubt everything he thought he could possibly doubt. And by doing so, he thought this was the correct method for locating the thing that maybe the axiom or the one truth that was indubitable, beyond any sort of doubt, that could not be questioned. And so he concluded, for example, the famous cogito, I think, therefore I am. Because even to be deceived, I have to be aware in some sense. So went his argument. But of course, as Peikoff points out, later philosophers quickly observed that it doesn't necessarily. Once you commence the process of doubting everything, and you are manufacturing doubts from sheer imagination, from sheer speculation, even the proposition that I'm aware can be questioned. Distinguish awareness from what? And so it becomes a strange way of beginning philosophy. Is that the appropriate approach, to doubt everything? Is that even epistemologically valid? It's true, if you're an objectivist, you're aware that Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher at the end of the 18th century, produced an argument against reason, indeed against consciousness and knowledge, much more sophisticated and much more profound than René Descartes' process of doubt here. And so he has been the greater focus, for example, of objectivist criticism. But as Dr. Peikoff points out, second only to Kant is René Descartes in terms of having an effect on our culture which is drenched in doubt. It is as if the sign of a sophisticated, educated mind is one willing to question any knowledge, to believe that knowledge is impossible, and that somehow this is the intellectually sophisticated position. And think about it. I mean, what could seem more reasonable? Continue to doubt everything until you can find something that you can't doubt. Now, of course, as we say, it does have certain problems here. So let's talk about possibility and let's talk about doubt. The mere fact that human beings can be wrong, the argument goes, and we all know we can be wrong, implies that we can never really know for sure. We can never really know. If it's possible that I can commit an error, if it's possible that I can be mistaken, and gosh knows how many times I've been mistaken, I think we can all say, yeah, to be a human being is to be capable of error. We can make all kinds of cognitive mistakes in our thinking and our reasoning. People make mistakes all the time. They misinterpret sensory data. They do have hallucinations sometimes. And certainly simple errors happen constantly. So since people are capable of error, since it's possible that people can be mistaken, doesn't that undermine any claim for truth? Can I ever say, I know something? This is the case. If it's possible that I'm error, again, doesn't that sound perfectly reasonable? No, it is not perfectly reasonable. And we can start in on this and understand how Descartes is starting sort of in a weird midstream way about knowledge. The concept of error itself implies that we know something. We could never have identified a mistake unless we actually know better. Oh, that was wrong. Now I know something else. We have to know something and know something for sure, or we could never be sure that we were ever in error. Every single instance, and that's the part to really focus on here, where you can say and where you have said, I was wrong, I was mistaken, that was a mess up on my part. It is only because you've actually found a truth. If you were incapable of ever finding truth, you could never have discovered that you were ever in error. In fact, the entire concept of error is built on the idea that we can't achieve truth. If we can never achieve truth, we cannot have the concept error. Error depends upon our knowing the truth now, something else. And so it's what objectivists call a stolen concept. The fallacy of the stolen concept is a fallacy that ignores the hierarchy, the necessary hierarchy in which concepts come to be known. So we can take the classic Proudhon Marxist claim, all property is theft. All property is theft. Well, for there to be theft, there has to be property. If there's no valid property, there's no such thing as theft. You can't use the concept of theft, which is derivative from the concept of property, to undermine the concept. You've stolen the concept, you see. And in the same way, this is a stolen concept fallacy. Error presupposes that you have the truth. If you tell me that I can never have the truth, or if the conclusion is truth is inaccessible to me, knowledge is inaccessible to me, then the concept of error loses all meaning, all context. You don't have a right, an epistemological right, if you will, to the concept of error, mistake. It is simply unavailable. So each and every instance, and bear that in mind, each and every instance of error requires that you have the truth at some point. So to divorce ourselves from the context of every single time we've discovered error and still have the concept of error is a mental mistake from the outset. Let's also consider what makes something known to us. How can we be sure that we're ever right? You know, we got possibility, we have knowledge. Is knowledge possible? Well, how do we get that? For most of human history, we didn't have the explicit discipline known as logic, the explicit discipline known as epistemology, the theory of knowledge, an important part of philosophy. Aristotle and the ancient Greeks were the first to really establish the science of logic, the science of knowing, establishing a standard of truth and objectivity against which we could measure things. What makes a truth discovered by science any more confident in our minds than something arbitrarily believed, than something believed by feeling or faith or any other pseudo means or acclaimed means of knowing? Well, it's because we have a method, a specific method that we're aware gets us in touch with the truth. We attend to the facts, we're logically consistent, we use our concepts appropriately, and knowledge is an achievement. It takes great effort. Yes, of course, we have to account for the possibility that we're in error, but that's exactly what we're doing when we go out and look, when we go out and find evidence, when we put the evidence together in a logical way, when we use logic to figure it out. If in fact our logic leads us there, with all of the evidence leading us there, then we have accounted for this possibility of error, for our fallibility. To go through the process of demonstration is not easy. Sometimes it's very, very difficult to establish a truth. Knowledge is an achievement. Sometimes, as I say, a very difficult achievement. But once you've gone through the process of demonstrating something, once you've accounted for all the evidence, once you've accounted for all the relevant facts, once you've logically integrated all of the data within your field, when you've done all of that effort, now to assert the possibility of error is to really commit a serious mistake. The proper response, as Dr. Peikoff points out, to a person after you've demonstrated something, you've shown them your evidence, you've gone through your logical demonstration, and someone still says, well, you know, people make mistakes. Maybe you've made a mistake there. The proper response, the only response is, what facts did I miss? Where was the error in my logic? What mistake have I made in my thinking? If they can't give a specific reason, then their doubt is baseless. Their doubt is arbitrary and speculative. There is a broader lesson here. The arbitrary, let's put it the way Miss Rand might put it, whim, must be removed from cognition. We cannot allow it in even a little bit, even a little bit. Obviously, one can manufacture speculative possibilities forever. This classic, maybe it's an evil demon possibility that Descartes laid out, or maybe I'm hallucinating possibility that Descartes lays out, can be multiplied almost infinitely with your imagination. We have, for example, a whole genre of science fiction based on this. In the 20th century, there have been philosophers who've discussed whether we are possibly just brains in a vat being stimulated, that this is all just some generated virtual reality that we're living in. Everyone has probably seen the movie Tron or the whole Matrix series of films. You know, what if it's a matrix and we don't even have any glitches, so that we have no way of even suspecting that we're living in a matrix? That's the exact sort of thought experiment that's going on here. But is that valid? Can we continue to manufacture possible doubts, speculative doubts, infinitely? Is that any more or less valid than just assuming, for example, I know everything? Both knowledge and doubt are contextual, To know, I have to establish the knowledge by accounting for all the facts, by using my logic as carefully as I can. But to doubt is also contextual. Do I have a reason to doubt, an actual reason to doubt, after I have gone through the trouble of demonstrating something? Both reason and doubt are contextual and only valid within a given context. The range of possibilities is limited. Not everything is possible. And when we say possible, what we're doing is we're giving an assessment of evidence, or it's meaningless. Possible, probable, certain. If there is some evidence that something could be, we say it's possible. If most of the evidence leans towards something, we say it's probable. If all of the evidence irrefutably points in one direction, then we say it's certain. But if it's not an assessment of evidence, it's not even possible. Even a possibility must be demonstrated by means of evidence. The classic example that Leonard Peikoff uses, which is sort of funny here, is one could say in the abstract, human beings are capable of running a mile in under 5 minutes. People have done it. Human beings are also capable of giving birth to babies. Many human beings have given birth to babies. But it would make no sense for me to walk up to an elderly man with paralyzed legs in a wheelchair who happens to be a mile away from the hospital, and to tell him, well, maybe you'll give birth to a baby after you've run to the hospital in under 5 minutes. That's absurd. That is absurd. Not everything is possible simply because it is possible generally. You have to establish that, in fact, in this case, it's also possible. The mere fact of human fallibility does not mean that every assertion is wrong. It can't. To have the concept of error, we have to have truths under our belt that we know to be true. And once you've argued the point out in taken into account every reasonable possibility, every fact-based possibility, you can say, I am sure, I am certain. Of course, it's always going to be within the context of the knowledge that you have. There's no way I can account for knowledge or evidence that I don't have. But within that context, your conclusion will always be valid if it was valid. We can go in many directions from here, but the basic point is, unless there's evidence to assess, you can't even assess something to be possible. So if someone says, this is possible, the response is, how do you know it's possible? What evidence do you have that it's possible? And until and unless, and in the context of knowledge, if someone is just simply doubting a proof that you've just gone through and you've accounted for the evidence and your logic has been valid, if someone comes up to you and says, well, maybe you're wrong, maybe you're still mistaken, perhaps you're deluded, perhaps it's a hallucination, maybe you're living in a matrix, you can say, no, what's your evidence for that? And until and unless you get evidence for that, there is no basis for even responding, any more than there'd be a basis for responding to any other arbitrary claim. Someone could claim that, aliens have visited the Earth 16 times in the course of history. They were responsible for several civilizations, as some people have arbitrarily asserted. But until there's actual evidence, it is utterly arbitrary and need not be. In fact, it would be a mistake to address it. There is no context for addressing or refuting that which already has no basis in reality to believe. With that, I hope it's clear that the entire project of modern philosophy in the West got off to a fallacious start and has undermined our ability, our confidence in our ability to know. And it's particularly ironic because since the time of Descartes, human beings have done extraordinary things. We land on the moon on a dime every time. We split invisible atoms to release the power of stars. We alter the molecules of life to create whole new species. The reality and the power of human knowledge should be obvious, especially in the last few centuries. But still, it is the sign of sophistication and an educated mind to doubt everything, to believe that I know nothing is the pinnacle of wisdom and sophistication today. While that is, of course, utterly fallacious, it is not a valid process to start doubting anything you can doubt by means of arbitrary speculation, by means of whim. Whim needs to be removed from human cognition. When that happens, when we remove whim from human cognition, not only do our conclusions become more objective, we can dismiss all of these baseless doubts that philosophy has burdened the Western mind with since. Thanks. Do we have any questions, Dylan?
Okay, we do have some super chats. We have from Robert. Robert says, maybe this isn't a super chat question. Who knows?
Well, we thank you very much for the super chat money. You can doubt all you like, but we appreciate both the question, the intent behind it, and doing it. So thank you. Doubt away. No.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that the fact that someone is asking a question presumes that, again, that Robert must know that this is going on and must know this is a philosophical discussion that's happening, or he couldn't have even doubted it. And the doubt, of course, I know Robert is probably just yanking our chain. The doubt is a solidly arbitrary one.
Then KMETIJA says, I love listening to James. Thumbs up, way up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. And then we do have some questions from the regular chat, it looks like. Again from Robert, is it possible that skeptics be wrong about skepticism and therefore it's possible that certainty is possible?
Yes, certainty is possible, but that's not how we get there. You can see the kind of rationalism that Descartes sort of embedded at the birth of modern philosophy here. You won't prove certainty in the sort of rationalistic way that Descartes is even approaching the subject. That has to be flushed out of our head. Certainty is a question of evidence and logic. Certainty is a question of the rationality of the conclusion. The method, was it an objective method that we used to get it? It's that positive assertion, and that is the field of epistemology. What qualifies as knowledge? How can we know that we know? When have we actually achieved knowledge? There's a whole science that's called epistemology, the theory of knowledge, and that's its job description, is to tell us how can we know, when we know. What makes Isaac Newton's science more valid than, say, someone's arbitrary assertion about ghosts, about unicorns? It's only the method of objectivity, that positive method, and the evidence and the substance of it, the evidence and logic that leads us to believing that we're certain. You can't prove certainty by doubting the doubt of the doubting doubt. No, that is totally bizarre. Descartes may as well have started out by saying, I'm going to believe everything I could possibly believe. It would be equally valid. Both knowledge and doubt must be, in effect, justified by the factual context.
Okay, we have another super chat from Robert. He says, "Excellent. It's not that you just it's not just that you have no obligation to respond or no good reason. It's that there is no response because nothing of substance, nothing grounded in evidence has been asserted."
Correct. Correct. It's as meaningless as the squawking of a parrot. Yeah, it's just noise. It truly is. A possibility cannot be assessed absent evidence. If there's no evidence, there's no reason to think it's possible. And if it's not possible, it can be dismissed, should be dismissed out of hand. In fact, to begin to talk about something where you can't even assess whether it's possible or not as a possibility is already an error, an evidentiary error.
Okay, we have a couple questions in the same vein here. One is, they refer to the same thing, different contexts, perhaps. One's asking about matrix theory, and one's asking about, I think it's called last Thursdayism, or how do you know the Earth wasn't created 10 seconds ago or last Thursday? Do you have any?
Well, again, that's a totally arbitrary speculation. It's utterly arbitrary speculation. Last Thursday? Well, how about a year ago last Thursday? How about 10 years ago last Thursday? How about, right? They're all equally valid, equally invalid. And just as equally invalid is my arbitrary assertion that there's an invisible elf on my shoulder. To the extent that you would dismiss the idea that there's an invisible elf standing on my shoulder, I will dismiss all of that out of hand. And must. I can only get myself into tangled errors the minute I start even engaging in something that is speculative like that. You know, as a former prosecutor, I'd like to just add at this point that the English and American legal systems basically recognize the very principle, the very objectivist principle here. When we, for example, instruct the jury that a defendant his guilt must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, what we're saying is you have to have certainty. There can be no doubt based in reason, no doubt based in the evidence. And the court is very careful to instruct the jury that reasonable doubt does not mean any doubt, does not mean any speculative doubt. Because if we open it to speculation, then anything is possible. No, it is even in the criminal law, for it to be a reasonable doubt, there has to be some basis in fact for it to be a reasonable doubt. A truly speculative, arbitrary, whimsical, fact-free doubt is no doubt at all. Certainly not a reasonable one.
I'm scrolling through looking for any more questions here. We do have an active chat today, but it looks like most of it is just chat, so less so than questions.
Right. You know, it's astonishing because Descartes was a brilliant mathematician and a very, very smart man. But it was obviously, if you're going to ask my opinion, it was obviously his ultimate agenda was to prove that there's this God, benevolent God, rather than some evil demon. It's a religious mode of thinking that got him messed up. It was the belief uh, in the supernatural, which inevitably messes up human thought. It divides mind from body, consciousness from existence, and generates by itself. The minute you posit a supernatural dimension, you've driven a wedge between the real and the ideal, between theory and practice, between mind and body. Ultimately, you're going to have these kind of problems the minute you open yourself up to that level of speculation. Then anything becomes possible.
So I don't know the full context of this question. It was mid-conversation, but Scott asked, can't calling something arbitrary to not answer a charge be abused as a delaying tactic in considering what happened? This might have been in context of certain events, maybe?
Well, it's certainly true that I could conceive, again, we're talking about possibilities here. It's certainly true I could conceive of someone ignoring a genuine possibility, a demonstrated possibility, by using the concept, but they'd be using the concept in a non-objectivist way. That's not the arbitrary. If there is, and insofar as there is evidence, insofar as there is reason to believe in the possibility, it is not arbitrary. Insofar it is truly speculative, truly whimsical, then it is. So could it be abused? Only by ignoring its meaning, only by misusing it, only by its misapplication, by calling something that does have evidence arbitrary when it is not, but actually a demonstrated possibility.
All right, it looks like we have worked through all the questions today that I am seeing. And if any more come up in the immediate, I will let you know. Do you have anything else to say?
Just a last thought. Earlier today, of course, Ayn Rand Center UK had a wonderful discussion between Don Watkins and Greg Salmieri, and Dr. Salmieri was discussing a very related topic, agnosticism. Agnosticism. The agnostic is a classic example of just what we're talking about here. Someone holding out a possibility that has not been established. That has not been established. It's not that the agnostic is saying, well, look at that evidence there. That evidence at least suggests it's possible. No. The agnostic, generally speaking, is saying to any assertion, such as it has been unproven that there's no God, or there is no God because it contradicts metaphysical axioms, for example. A response to that would say, no, well, maybe there is a God, is just a pure arbitrary possibility. The agnostic, the hardcore dogmatic agnostic, is holding out for an arbitrary possibility. That's the first thing. The second thing you'd say about an agnostic, for example, is it doesn't answer the question. Either you do believe in God and have an active, abiding belief in God, or you don't, like a newborn baby. And for whatever reason that you don't have this belief in God, you're an atheist. Atheism doesn't ask why the belief isn't there in someone's mind. It just says the belief is gone. Or never was there. So that there's really only two possibilities here: theism and atheism. You either have the belief or you don't have the belief. Agnosticism it's not even a position on whether there is a God or not, but it tends just to be a flat assertion of arbitrary speculative possibility. Of course, the same speculative possibility works with not just one God, but polytheism, the 12 Greek gods, or the hundreds of Hindu gods, or ghosts, elves, unicorns, you name it. We could go on forever and ever and ever manufacturing arbitrary possibilities. And it is not the job of reason to disprove anything that the human imagination can conceive of. That would be a totally invalid approach to knowledge in any instance, in any context. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. We're going to have another one next week. If you like these, we'll continue doing discussions of Leonard Peikoff essays. There are all kinds of other things. Please check out the Ayn Rand Center UK website or page at Facebook. Check out all the amazing material that we're now producing for subscribers, and I let me get a plug in to subscribe to Ayn Rand Center UK. For subscribers, there are all kinds of perks. This Sunday, we're going to continue to have a workshop on Dr. Leonard Peikoff's amazing course, Understanding Objectivism. We're already up to lecture 3, but it's not too late to get a lot of value from it, and you can really interact with us when we discuss these issues. So please consider subscribing. Please hit like, subscribe, and share if you do like this kind of material. And thank you very much for listening. Take care.